Hello. All right. Thank you all. Can everybody hear me? I think you can. Yeah, I guess I was going to try to do an intro of Astro, but he just did that, so I think I can skip over that part. I also want to thank Matt for warming up the audience for me. I really appreciate that. I know you're all really here for me, so appreciate it. Yes, Astro is a framework. And kind of the pitch today is a different way to think about Astro and a different way to think about frameworks themselves. Frameworks have evolved over time, Astro as well, right? Astro started out doing purely static sites. He told you that. But we evolved, and then we do more advanced things. We do server-side rendering on the actual server. All sorts of features I'm going to get into here in just a little bit. But Astro is still thought of as a static site generator, so I kind of want to, change the way you think about it and change the way you think about frameworks and how frameworks should change and evolve and add new features. The one thing I really want to get through is that you can have a framework that still has that simple core, the ability to build simple things easily, but still have all those features that you need for more advanced use cases. So that's kind of what I'll be getting into. So let's go ahead and get started. Built a website lately. People here have built websites, right? Like I am in the right place. This is developers, right? Yeah. Okay. Good. Yes. It's gotten kind of hard to build websites in some ways. Now, I don't want to be like, old man shaking fist at cloud and say that things are too complicated, but they kind of are in some regards. I think we should acknowledge, though, that the reason why things have gotten a little bit harder is because the standards are higher, right? Like the users expect better experiences than they used to. And also our tools have become more advanced. Our tools gives us the ability to prototype things in like a few days. You can build a really rich application in just a matter of days, and that's something you couldn't do 10 years ago. So the changes of how frameworks have evolved, the changes of standards of users have really changed how we build even our simple things. But it's also true that the evolution of frameworks have evolved in such a way that has made it difficult for us to kind of start with a simple base. So I'm not going to go through a little history here. No dates. Oh, it got louder. Okay. No dates or anything. Kind of a vague history of how frameworks have evolved and how static site generators have evolved. And so what we think of as JavaScript frameworks, TypeScript frameworks, these were really designed for more app-like experiences. How they kind of evolved over time is, originally in the early 2000s, the typical way that you would build any particular website was you built it using a server framework, Rails, PHP, etc. You rendered everything on the server, and then when you got to the client, if you needed to do some little bit of interactivity, you would attach event listeners to the DOM, listen to events, and you would like update some DOM over here. But that didn't scale to complexity, right? Like as applications become more rich, more complicated, updating a bunch of different things all at once became very difficult to manage. And I really think of, one particular thing that happened is people started building much more ambitious types of applications. Like I think back to one in particular called Google Wave. I don't know how many people know about that. Yeah, cool. So Google Wave, if you don't know, was kind of a cross between email and Slack. It was like a real-time email application. This is real-time before WebSockets existed. It was pretty amazing for its time. But one thing that's very interesting about it from an engineering perspective is that it was a Java application, like Java, not JavaScript, Java. And it was built in a framework called GWT, Google Web Toolkit. So that was like pretty advanced for the time. That was really a realization of people at the time that, the things have changed, right? Like the need to build much more advanced things is here. And JavaScript frameworks kind of took on that same thing, right? They got to the point where it wasn't enough just to make small updates to the page. You really wanted to build a full application. You wanted to start building things like dashboards. I worked as a consultant around this time, and we would build a lot of internal applications. And this is kind of really the birthplace of SPAs, single page applications. It got to the point where frameworks evolved and they started introducing templating. They also introduced data binding. And all these things made it much easier to build these highly interactive interfaces. And templating especially changed things because it made it so that it was no longer the case that you would want to render on the server and in the client, because if you render on the server and on the client, that means you're duplicating your templates, right? Like you don't want to like duplicate all that work. So spas evolved towards being only in the client, and all you would serve from the server is like basically a blank HTML document with a script tag. And so that's how we kind of got here. And then from there, developers, all of us, we use these tools, we like them, they helped us build amazing experiences. And so we began to pull them into our next thing that we built. And then, it didn't matter how simple, we wanted to use that same thing. And that's kind of evolved until, eventually people are building their blogs with the same frameworks. And yeah, that's kind of how we got here. But of course, frameworks did evolve, but they kind of evolved backwards, right? They kind of started off with these highly rich experiences, and they had to develop new features for, different types of use cases. For example, server-side rendering comes from the need to get that initial content out to the user before the application actually boots up. But this always stopped short of true simplicity. And then around the same time all this is happening, we get more simple types of frameworks. Simple frameworks, really, I think of static site generators, like traditional static site generators. I don't know if people are familiar with Jekyll. That was a big one, a big breakthrough. We also had Hugo, eventually Alevity. And these tools were really great at, especially speed-wise, creating a lot of different pages at build time. However, they were mostly focused on things like templating, basic routing. They didn't really see it as their responsibility to help you once the user got into, once the browser loaded and you got into the client. So because of this doesn't really get you past sort of personal or content-oriented use cases. Companies did and do use these sorts of tools, but they use them more for content-oriented types of things. So static-site generators didn't really see this as their responsibility to go any further. So on the one hand, you have frameworks which are kind of starting from complex use cases and going this way. We got static-site generators kind of going this way, but you got this whole area in the middle that's really been underserved. So Astro tries to be practical. We saw this situation. We said, why can't you have a static site generator that also has a client component that helps you out with the interactivity? And so that's how we kind of think about things. We think about a framework that it should be malleable. And so it should be able to adapt to the type of site that you want to build. You might build an e-commerce website, which that has a certain set of features that you might want. You might have a marketing site. And these should all live under one umbrella. There's no reason why you need to boot up a new project to make your landing page, right? Why can't that live in the same project that your application builds? If you're building a SaaS application, a SaaS client-side app, one of the first things you do after you've built your app is you're like, oh yeah, I want to show this to the world. Let me create a marketing landing page. And Astro can help you with both of those things. So this is kind of the dichotomy that I see. On the one hand, you have the full SSR type of application, really content-oriented. And again, I'm going to repeat a lot of these same terms over and over again, but marketing pages, obviously blogs, those sorts of things. They're usually logged out experiences, but they don't necessarily have to be, but that's commonly the case. And on the other extreme, we have things that do not have any SSR, purely client-side apps, like I said, dashboards, those types of things. There's really no, Discord, for example. I don't know if Discord does server rendering. I can't imagine why they would. Those types of things really don't, are kind of in the other extreme. And in the middle, you have a lot of application. Most things live in the middle, right? You might have some logged in state, but it also might be more content oriented. That is to say that you have some content that everybody sees, like e-commerce in particular. You have a product page, but then you still also have some more dynamic sorts of content. So let's talk about Astro's approach. How do we tackle this problem where you want to build all these different types of things, but we also want to tailor experiences to specific types of things that you're building. So our approach is to start simple. We think that it's much easier to start simple and kind of scale up to your needs rather than start complicated and try to like hide features that are kind of always there. So with Astro, you can start with just plain HTML. Like literally, you can copy and paste HTML you found on the internet. You can put it in a .astro file, and you can build it, and you got yourself a website. So it kind of starts that simple. But Astro templates, .astro files are also do templating, and you see here we have a simple Astro template. The part at the top there with the dashes, we call it the front matter section. That is just TypeScript. You can just do any regular TypeScript inside of there. You can import NPM packages, do any kind of craziness you need to do. We also have asset bundling. You can import CSS. You can import JavaScript inside of a script tag if you want to do like some, client-side scripting. We will bundle all those different things for you, like at the application level, right? So like all of your pages get accounted for when it calculates how to build each of these sorts of resources and build those out for you. This is something that like traditional static site generators typically didn't do. Some of them have kind of evolved towards this now, but that was not always the case. And then we also have Markdown. So you can just drop a Markdown file inside of source pages, and now you've built an HTML document from a Markdown document. So it kind of starts that simple. We got straightforward file-based routing for all of this, right? So everything inside source pages gets built to a page. That can be Astro, that can be Markdown, it could be TypeScript for API routes, for example. And then we have some more dynamic routing capabilities when you do need that. So you kind of get the point here. Astro scales down. Just to reiterate, it's much easier to kind of scale up from a simple base than it is to do the opposite. So Astro is able to do that for you. And it doesn't force you to learn things too early. Like you're able to build a website already with what I've shown you, but there's a lot more you can do. But eventually you probably will need structure, and so we realized this. And one of the lessons of the early days of Astro is it's pretty important to have content and presentation separation between those two things. So we have a feature called content collections. You can create folders inside of source content. You can put all of your Markdown, your MDX, any sort of content inside of there. You define a schema for that content. You say, for my blog, I always expect there to be a title. That makes sure that your Markdown does contain a title in the front matter, and it'll give you good error messages, so you kind of get a good user experience while doing all of this. And then you get huge flexibility in presentation. You don't need to understand this slide, but it allows you to like grab all of your blog posts. You can sort them however you want. You can display links for them. You kind of have full freedom and full type safety in doing all of this. Another thing that we do with Astro is we allow you to bring your own front-end framework. Like Astro is your back-end framework, but you still often do want a front-end framework. So that could be React, Solid, Vue. There's dozens of these out in the community depending on what you like. And then we have these directives, client idle, client load. And these basically tell Astro how to prioritize loading this component. Is this a high priority component? Is this a low priority component? And you kind of get the flexibility there. We also have an image component, so you can optimize images. This is another thing that kind of the traditional static site generators didn't used to give you. Now they're starting to do so, but with the image component, you kind of define the dimensions for your image. It gets optimized for you. It gets resized. It gets hashed file names that allows you to like have very long cache headers for these things. And then you can kind of scale up from there. You get to the point where maybe content collections is not meeting your needs. You have content not just like in a very structured folder structure, but maybe you like have JSON dumps of some data that you want to pull into your site, or maybe you're like building a course, like, and you want to have an opinionated structure. That's not something you can get from content collections, but with Content Layer you can. You can pull remote CMS data down as well. Like this slide deck I built with Content Layer. So this is a relatively new feature that we have in Astro 5. And it looks very similar to what you saw, the config for content collections. But now there's a new loader property. This tells Astro how to load this particular data, but you get the flexibility now to like load data any way that you want to. All right, let's kind of pivot away from like the experience of building a website and talk a little bit about performance, because that matters as well, especially when you're building hybrid sorts of sites. So with Astro, we kind of recognize that sites are often a mix between dynamic and static content. You might start off with a site that is purely static, purely build time rendered, but then you want to add like a contact endpoint or something like that, right? And so what you can do is you can specify export const pre-renders equals false on that particular page or API route, and Astro will build that to run on the server while the rest of your pages are still pre-rendered. And that kind of is a really powerful thing. But you can also do the opposite. You can specify, hey, I want this thing to render on the server by default. I have a very dynamic application. You know, like most of my pages are pulling from a database. But there's still, you got that marketing page. You have some other pages that you would like to optimize. You can pre-render those at build time just by kind of doing the opposite of what I just showed you before. But that was enough for us. We were like, well, maybe you want to like blend static and hybrid, or excuse me, blend static and dynamic on the same page. And so we built a new feature called Server Islands, which gives you that. And this is great for like an e-commerce sort of use case. If you think about like a product page, that is very like static content. When I say static, I really mean it's kind of like global. Everyone sees the same product, right? And so if you're not updating your products all that often, you want to be able to highly cache those pages, make them available to the user instantly. But you still are going to have some dynamic content. You have the user's like avatar, you have some comments, and so Server Islands gives you that. I'm going to show a quick demo here. This is just a demo sort of application. I'm going to reload a couple times. You see that the main content comes in right away, like instantly, but then you see kind of this other stuff coming in soon thereafter. So we do like try to optimize loading of the dynamic content, but because it is dynamic, it doesn't block the rest of the outer page. Kind of the main content is able to be highly cached, and you get a great experience that way. All right, so we build static sites, we build e-commerce sites now, but what about logged-in applications? And I'm gonna make a case that spas are actually good. We kind of went through a period where people started thinking badly about spas, but I feel like client-side spas are actually a little bit misunderstood. And as I kind of talked about earlier, JavaScript frameworks evolved backwards. And because of that, people kind of got a bad experience when they started building things that really didn't need all that heavyweightness that the spas provided. So just because they were used inappropriately doesn't mean that you should never use a spa. Spas are still great for a lot of different types of things. And these are just some of my opinions of like what is the ingredient for a good spa. Something that's highly dynamic, like throughout the web, throughout the page, you're updating different things, everywhere throughout the page. You very rarely transition to a very different looking page. That is to say, you have like kind of a shell, and you're kind of always living inside of that shell. That's a very good reason to use a spa. The users probably logged in, don't have to be, but they likely are. And the content is highly personalized. That is to say, it's your list of tasks, your team's tasks, linear, for example. I'm pretty sure is a spa, and I think it probably should be. So you can actually build a spa with Astro. Astro, of course, has all of Vite. It's built on top of Vite, so you have the entire Vite ecosystem. We have the ability to import framework components, so you can import a React component. We have one particular client directive called client only, and what this says, only render this in the client. Don't even try to render it on the server. Maybe you're using a dependency that doesn't run on the server, so it doesn't even do that at all. So you got yourself a spa, but you still get all the benefits that you get from Astro. You get all the bundling, and you get the lazy optimized islands, and you still have the ability to like pick your own router or pick whatever tools you like for that part of the application, while the other part of your app is kind of, whatever it needs to be. So yeah, Astro is here for you. It gives you the ability to mix different types of pages on the same code base. You don't have to like have a different code base for each of your different pages. So you can have your blog, your marketing site, a shop, an e-commerce site, an app, all under one umbrella. So I know I rushed through a lot of that. I appreciate everybody sticking around. Come talk to me after the break, and I'd love to, see what everybody's building. Thanks a lot.